shall overcome. Yes, we can.
Person, woman, man, camera, TV.
What the f*** is wrong with you?
But we do begin tonight with this historic settlement of the $1.6 billion defamation case against Fox News, accused of knowingly airing false claims about Dominion voting machines after the 2020 election. Tonight, Fox News agreeing to pay Dominion $787.5 million. News of the settlement came late today as the trial was about to begin, the jury already sworn in. Dominion's lawyers and CEO John Poulos saying Fox admitted to telling lies about Dominion. Part of Dominion's case centered on what some Fox News hosts said on the air to millions of their viewers versus what they were saying and texting about those claims in private. Many of them were set to testify, as was Fox News owner Rupert Murdoch.
Well, welcome to What the Franklin. I'm your host, Chip Franklin, and it's been just a little more than 24 hours now since the settlement was reached between Fox News and Dominion, and for ostensibly lying about the efficiency, the quality, the integrity of their voting machines. And it cost them $787 million, about half of what they were looking for. There's a lot of disappointment out there because a lot of people wanted to hear Fox personalities have to testify and tell the world that they were lying and that they knew they were lying, that they knew that the election was not stolen. There's a lot of questions here. There's Smartmatic has a suit of $2.6 billion, I think, coming up. It's another company that made voting machines. But for now, I guess the real question is, does this change the policy and the way that Fox will have to act moving forward? That's a fair question. Joining me right now is an old friend, David Katz. He's a former assistant U.S. attorney, and he's nice enough to join me to try to answer some of these questions. David, first of all, were you surprised by the settlement?
I was not surprised. I predicted that once it really got hot, once opening statements or trial was going to begin, that Fox would settle. What happened was that Dominion's lawyers did a very good job during the discovery process, and they did a good job warding off these motions. And so they got more and more discovery, more and more incriminating, really confessions by the top brass at Fox News, including Rupert Murdoch, also from the top presenters like Sean Hannity and Tucker Carlson. And so it became a very embarrassing fight. Now, as to your question about we'd like to have seen it, if news stations are interested and presenters are interested, they really can make this dramatic. There were depositions under oath. Rupert Murdoch said things that were very self-destructive about his role and not really caring about whether they presented the facts as they knew them on TV. Sean Hannity said he didn't believe a word of any of this stuff about Dominion, but he put it on the air and endorsed it anyway. Tucker Carlson said he really hated, despised, and had contempt for Trump. They can read that all day long with a picture of Tucker Carlson. They can do a little animated Tucker Carlson and have him say those things and make fun of him all day long. It might have been as good as the testimony, because in a civil case, you have the testimony under oath before the trial ever begins. And that's what Dominion had. And that's what really finally brought Fox News to surrender, to give up and pay half the award.
One of the things I found fascinating, well, two things actually, is that the fact that the judge, even before a trial, came out and said there's absolutely no doubt that what Dominion alleges occurred, that the plaintiff here has 100% firm ground to stand on, that these guys, they were lying and they knew they were lying, as evidenced by these texts. Without these texts, you could probably, Fox stood a pretty good chance in court of proving that, they just got information and they were passing it along as a news source. But obviously the malice part of any kind of civil trial was pretty obvious here, that they intended on spreading this disinformation, these lies. But the second part about this that I kind of wonder is, did Dominion feel that, going to a jury was, as most people will tell you, is always a crapshoot. You don't know what's going to happen. And that's why they chose half of what they were asking for, number one. And number two, they didn't ask for an on-air apology. Did Dominion really want that? Or was that pretty much people on my side of the street, the left?
Those are four great questions in one. So the first one, it was defamation per se. There was no factual basis. There was no support for this. That made it awfully egregious. I mean, even news outlets that you and I might have contempt for or think that they don't do a very good journalistic job, they have some basis, right? There's some there. There was no there. This was totally made up. And so that was why it was defamation per se. Hugo Chavez's ghost did not control the vote count. Dominion didn't miscount any votes. There was no allegation that they miscounted the votes for any Republicans running for Congress, Senate, or any state office. Only for Trump did Dominion supposedly transfer the votes that were cast for Trump over to Biden. So none of this made any sense, and it was defamation per se. Going to your next thing about why they settled, these corporations incorporate in Delaware for a reason. And one of the reasons, Chip, is that the law is very favorable to them. One of the favorable aspects of the law is that you get a 12-person civil jury, and they have to all be unanimous. Think about that for a corporation to actually get held liable in a civil case. The plaintiff always has to show against the big corporation, if it's incorporated in Delaware and can then choose Delaware for the venue of the trial, that you have to get 12 jurors. That's a lot in a civil case. And that they have to all be unanimous. That's also a bit extraordinary in a civil case. So
and that's Delaware's unique in that way. Is that what you're saying?
I think there's one or two other states like that. But Dominion had to take into account that there could be some, Trump loyalist who got on the jury by answering the questions in a way to get on the jury. There'd be somebody who just felt sympathy or watched Fox. And so 11-1 would not have been a win for Dominion. They'd have to go back and have a retrial, put all that money up front. And there was, of course, pressure from the lawyers. I don't know exactly what their fee arrangement was, but if they got any kind of a contingent fee, let's say it was 33% if you settle and 40% if you win, obviously there was huge pressure from the lawyers that they would rather have 33% for sure of an incredibly big pie than take their chance for 40% of what might be a pie they had to go to retrial for. It would be whittled down on appeal. Even if there's a judgment, you can appeal it, and then there's often a deal made during the appeal, because why take the chances with the appeal and why wait and all those kinds of things. So this was a landmark decision. They have not been able to cite, the commentators, any defamation judgment that was ever this large. It was almost $1 billion. That's a huge amount. And so Fox can say, oh, well, it wasn't that big a deal. I think it will change their behavior. I think if this one came along again, even Fox would flinch from something this outrageously defamatory. But of course, they still put, their slanted news on TV night after night, right? The big presenters, Hannity.
That's not against. There's no law against lying. I mean, as long as you don't defame somebody, right, or malign somebody, right?
Well, there used to be like actual FCC control, which of course has diminished over the years. Chip.
Well, there is no FCC control on cable. I mean, they don't have right.
Well, if you out and out lie in certain ways, I mean, you're going to end up with tort liability. You're going to end up, if you lie that something's going on in the neighborhood that it's not, and then there's a riot there and stuff like that. I think that there are some kinds of lies that are not defamation that are going to
fire in the theater, fire in the theater stuff, basically, right? Yeah. Right. Okay. All right. So I didn't mean to interrupt you, but obviously, somewhere in this deal, Dominion can't go after the personalities, right?
Well,
excuse me.
Dominion still has some very lively lawsuits going against personalities. They're suing Giuliani. That hasn't been settled, nor tried. They're suing Sidney Powell.
Mike Lindell.
Yeah,
Mike Lindell.
The pillow guy. They're suing OAN, and they're suing Newsmax. And those cases are live. And, when you look at the other side of this, I don't know if we'll have time to get to this. This greatly emboldens, it may send a very valid message and have accountability for Fox. If you think about Dominion, and especially this huge law firm, talk about being emboldened. And they're going to go after some smaller news outlets, right, with this as a blueprint. And we may not like some of the cases that it brings against some of the smaller news outlets who won't have Fox's resources. And you can see already the roadmap. The roadmap is to get past all the motions for summary judgment if you're suing a news organization. Make sure you get these emails and texts and everything else. and then show that they had reservations, the news outlets or the news presenters, about the program that they then put on the air. And that may end up boomeranging on some news outlets that aren't Fox. I mean, what Fox did was absolutely egregious. I like the roadmap, but I think there is some concern that they are really going to go after not the Giulianis and the Newsmaxes of this world, but some news outlets that just cannot stand up to them, and will have to turn over all these internal investigations, and they'll bankrupt them. This is not the gang, but this is the kind of theories that bankrupted Gawker. And whether people think Gawker should have been bankrupted or not, it bankrupted Gawker. It drove them out of business. Remember this whole Hulk Hogan thing?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. And in fact, it was unforeseen, and it happens pretty quickly. And then Gawker was gone, and it actually, it cast a pall across all of the people like myself, that I put opinion out there, harsh opinion towards people who I disagree with politically, and sometimes the people I do. But for the most part, I wonder, is there a dark side to this judgment for, smaller people, the Raw Stories or the Chip Franklins of the world that go out after, and I'll call Tucker Carlson a racist based on what I believe is language that indicates such, and or a liar. I mean, are these because they're public figures? Does that still hold? I mean, we know the Supreme Court was beginning to look at that again about satire and parody. Does this muddy some waters, some quote unquote journalistic waters here?
Well, it didn't end up producing a lot of published opinions. If it had gone to trial and gone to the U.S. Supreme Court, it would have absolutely been the most significant case since New York Times v. Sullivan. There were some rulings that will definitely be precedent. This idea of defamation per se, the idea that you cannot report something just because it's news if you know it's false. You can't report that the president is lying about something if you know the president's lying about it, and endorse it and pound it night after night. One of the things that was so remarkable about this case, and I don't think that a lot of other news outlets are going to run into, usually the defamation is a one-off or maybe a two-off. This was night after night. This was hundreds of incidents. It was Bartiromo. It was Tucker Carlson. It was Sean Hannity. It was the other guy that I think they fired by now.
Dobbs.
Dobbs, right? So it was relentless. And of course, it was all part of the big lie. It was all designed to produce this result. And as I said before, there was absolutely no evidence for this. I mean, if this had been, a lot of people have said, my God, how could Murdoch be this stupid? And the man is not stupid. I mean, maybe he's doddering by now, but he's not stupid. He built a huge news empire, and it wasn't by being stupid, and he kind of left it to his kids and all this kind of stuff. But certainly it would have been a lot smarter, just from a self-interest point of view, to hit the rest of the big lie that they did, because they weren't, if they said that some, poor ladies who were election workers had done something wrong and this and that, yes, they might get some, advocacy group to represent them, but they weren't going to get this Dominion, just this massive effort that Dominion put forth, this legal effort. There's very few people. They really picked on somebody their own size, Fox did, and they got punched right in the nose for $800 million. I mean, they had supposedly $4 million cash on hand that Fox could put its hands on, but no matter what, $800 million.
Time out. Wait. They only have $4 million in cash.
$4 billion. $4
billion. Oh,
so the discovery showed that Fox News had $4 billion on hand. But even so, $800 million. I don't care how big a corporation you are. That's a huge hit, and it's a huge hit because of the accountability because they did really wrong. So I don't think that a smaller outlet. I don't think, Chip, you're in any trouble whatsoever for expressing your opinions or anything like that. I don't think I'm in any trouble for expressing my opinions. But we should all, obviously, we all meet that standard that we don't say things that we know are untrue.
Yeah. We're talking to David Katz, again, a former assistant U.S. attorney, about the Dominion Fox settlement. Let me ask you this. What's it like right now in the newsroom and in the corner offices of Fox moving forward? Having paid this, or I don't know how they pay this fine. I'm sure they just don't write a check overnight, but I don't know. But moving forward, is there a certain trepidation now there, or do they feel like maybe that this is it, that who else is going to come after them?
Well, I think Fox does write a pretty large check. There's some tax planning. If it doesn't matter to Dominion, let's say it's a tax break for them to write half the check this year and write half the check on January 2nd of next year. I'm sure that Dominion, can work that out with them. It's a very large site. If it makes sense for Dominion, it also makes sense for Fox. I'm sure there's some tax planning and how it goes, but they write a very large check for that amount very soon. That's what's different from if they go to trial and it bounces around and maybe they have to retry it and all that kind of stuff. By the way, I didn't answer your question before about did Dominion really want an apology. I think at the end of the day, this constitutes an apology, maybe not to political people, not to people who hope that this would be sort of a calling to account all the awful things that Fox News during the big lie, causing the insurrection, the way they covered what was going on leading up to the insurrection, all that sort of thing. But from Dominion's point of view, their sales are going to rebound. If they've slacked off, they're going to rebound. If you're the election supervisor of even a red state like, I don't know, Oklahoma, like Alabama, when they come to you with this and they say the judge found that they were lying, Fox had to admit that they were lying about us. There was defamation per se because there was no basis for any of this. We count the votes fairly. Their business is going to rebound. And so this constituted an apology. That even the lukewarm statement that Fox gave, given the judge's findings, the fact they paid $800 million, they're going to do fine without the quote apology. But if you watch Fox News, you're never going to hear about this. I mean, I guess the idea would have been that they're supposed to read the apology in a certain form so many times on Fox News that they weren't going to agree with. And at the end of the day, the base that watches Fox News are not the people who decide whether to hire Dominion to count the votes. That's state officials. And this connoted loud and clear that Fox was wrong and Dominion had done nothing wrong in the count. So they got what they needed to protect their reputation, which was their lawyer's job, Chip.
I guess the question.
What's it like in the newsroom? They're worried about Smartmatic right now. As you said before, Smartmatic is still suing for $2 billion, and they have a roadmap how to go after Fox. Now, there may be different issues involved, but they're going to try to settle with Smartmatic, I think. If they want to avoid a trial with all their top people and with their top presenters, they need to make a deal with Smartmatic. And I think that's what's ultimately going to happen with Smartmatic, a deal.
The average person watching Fox, though, moving forward, probably won't notice a difference because of this settlement. I mean, they're not going to talk about Dominion anymore, but they'll continue to talk about Joe Biden. They'll continue to talk about the Democrats. They'll continue to talk about policies the Democratic Party has. So really, fundamentally, Fox will be the same. I don't know what OAN and Newsmax are, and they're really not even in the same ballpark. But moving forward, I guess the real question here is what does this mean to the United States? What does it mean to, this guy, this old idea that, I guess someone like Edward R. Murrow, it's the truth and the whole truth and nothing but the truth. Well, apparently you can buy the truth now. You can lie and then write a check for it. And I think that's kind of the cynical view that people will have moving forward after this. And I just wonder if Hannity and Tucker Carlson and Laura Ingraham and Maria Bartiromo and the rest of the squad, Judge Jeannie, all these, they'll get kind of a slap on the wrist, but they'll move forward. And I'm not sure we're going to see a huge change. David, I know there's something else you want to talk about too today, and I think it's important. The Supreme Court has made a decision regarding the birth control pill. How do you say the name of it again? Mifepristone, I believe that. And I want.
I'm going to let you tackle that tongue twister, and also the judge's name in Amarillo, Texas. You can do both of those, Chip.
Okay. Well, let's just look forward here, and obviously this was the two conflicting decisions: one out of Washington State, one out of Texas. Whether or not this pill could actually be purchased by women who wanted to end a pregnancy for whatever reasons. And that, just before we get into this, that's something that bothers me tremendously is when they say, for rape or incest, because you're still judging women who want an abortion for whatever reason, and there can be a myriad of health reasons, psychological reasons, whatever. I mean, obviously it's, I don't know how you feel about this, but personally, I think that this is even more BS because we're not actually getting moving forward back to the Roe v. Wade mentality. What's the latest on this, and what does it mean for women moving forward, and when the Supreme Court might actually hear this case?
Well, those are some very interesting insights. And as it goes forward, we're going to see what happens, particularly in the legislation in the various states. We're going to see if Congress can really craft a bill, kind of meet each other halfway on this issue. It actually might happen because the Republicans are getting just demolished by this issue, and they may decide to just stop the suffering politically and make some kind of deal, which might be kind of what the law was before Dobbs. Now, the law before Dobbs, as you said, might not make a lot of Democrats happy. It certainly wouldn't make a lot of
everybody that went to Dobbs was the decision last summer that effectively gave states the ability to control abortion from soup to nuts. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, if you passed a statute that basically preserved that status quo, that would involve women having to drive 300 miles to get a surgical abortion, not what we're talking about with these pills. And it would involve a lot of things, these super certifications that clinics needed, to the point that there was like one clinic in Louisiana that could pass the certification. The pre-Dobbs status quo is not something that the liberals and the women's right to choose people would be that happy about. But, that's political compromise, is that they say a good deal is both sides walk away from the table thinking, I wish I'd gotten more. Did I really settle for that? But they're both willing to sign on the dotted line. So that might be the legislation that could be worked out. But absent that legislation, things have gone totally askew, because the Dobbs justification given by the 5-4 majority, they also had Roberts join some of it, but the real 5-4 hardcore, let's overturn Roe v. Wade, they said, we're going to leave this all up to the states. And what's so askew right now is it's not even left up to the states. This is a judge in a red state who's an advocate of the pro-life movement himself. This one judge is now going to tell us in all the blue states, tell young women, poor women, women of color, whoever needs this pill, that they can't get the pill. Now, the Fifth Circuit actually did not go all the way down that road. And so the Supreme Court now is not going down that road for 2 more days. For 2 more days, the law is that in all the states in the country, a woman can still get that pill. She can get it by mail. She can get it without seeing a doctor. But they don't seem to have 5 votes to say what I just said, that we're going to go back to the status quo before this judge entered this injunction and let everybody get the pill until some further ruling. But they also don't have the votes to say that the judge or the Fifth Circuit was right. So to try to make this comprehensible for people, right now, the law is as it was before, but the Fifth Circuit would make it so that a woman has to see a doctor in every state in the union. That includes the blue states. And that a woman could not get this pill, which is how most women have abortions. There's 53% of the abortions are done with this pill, Chip. So,
but hold on, David. What part of the Constitution are they standing on that says that the federal government can tell a woman that she has to see a doctor in order to get a medical procedure? I mean, I can see where a state, following the 10th Amendment and last summer's decision where they said states had this autonomy, but how can they say, I mean, what if Biden says, no, I ignore that and allows these states to do it on their own? It seems to me you can't have it both ways. And the Supreme Court, I mean, I can't imagine that Gorsuch and Roberts are going to go along with this. I mean, the rest of them are kind of cuckoo crazy, maybe even Kavanaugh. I just don't understand how they can tell women in a state that they can't take a pill to deal with. I mean, we're not talking about a late developed pregnancy here. We're talking about in the first couple weeks, right? When there's when it's smaller than the fingernail here on my little finger. That's not a human being, right? That is not a self-sufficient, independent human being. It doesn't even look. It's a cluster of cells. So I don't understand how the Supreme Court can rule that and then not rule that life begins at conception, or I don't even know when, because conception is not one magical moment. It's over a period of days. So I guess I don't understand the legal backing that they would have to be able to restrict this pill from going into blue states?
Well, a lot of people, a substantial majority of the population, this is Democrats, Republicans, Independents, believe in a woman's right to choose and control of her body during the first trimester. And that is why the Republicans are getting clobbered. They just got clobbered over this issue with the Supreme Court race in Wisconsin. They've gotten clobbered in blue states like Kansas at a referendum. And this is a terrible issue for the Republicans, who may come to the realization that people agree with the views that you just expressed. Republicans, Independents agree with that view. But, there's a very hardcore, that's a single issue voter in the Republican Party that is fanatical about this issue. And they block vote based on this issue, and they control some of these legislatures, and they seem to have an awful lot of influence with this judge who didn't get picked randomly. They cherry picked this judge because they went to a division where he's the only judge, and they got this nationwide injunction, which is an outrage. But at least,
and he's very religious, and he refers to fetuses as human beings. And I mean, he's obviously not your typical conservative jurist who looks at these things, with a bent, but not an agenda.
And Chip, that was clear. So people should realize that, this judge is thanks to Romney and Murkowski. They knew exactly what they were getting, and they were the two votes that put him over the top. And you wonder, there are Democrats who voted for Clarence Thomas, and that's sort of all anybody remembers about them. 30 years later, they see Clarence Thomas, they look at, oh my God, let's look at the Democratic senators who approved this guy. I think in 20, 30 years, if this judge in Amarillo, Texas keeps doing what he's doing, he becomes, in other words, the judge who they bring every case to, and he makes one outrageous ruling after another. And why shouldn't he? He has life tenure, and they think they know what they're going to get from him. And that's what people remember about Romney and Murkowski, this judge ruling 20, 25 years from now. So they got to be really careful with these Senate votes. And, you say that he's not in the mainstream, and yet two mainstream Republicans like that, knowing what they were getting, put him on the bench. But anyway, the argument, at least about the pills, is that the Supreme Court will not affirm that the FDA was wrong. That they will say that ship has sailed. That happened 20, 23 years ago. That's too old. And so you cannot go back and challenge these pharmaceuticals like penicillin, or even like the vaccine things that are from, let's say, 10 years ago. But the way they got the hook in the Fifth Circuit is to say, well, we can challenge the recent things that the FDA did. And recently, the FDA said that you could get this pill by telemedicine. And so that's what they're going to hang their hat on. And they're going to say that all we're reviewing is telemedicine for certain pills, and that we're not changing the whole pharmaceutical certification process. That's what would happen if the Supreme Court ultimately affirms that part of the Fifth Circuit. And they're going to say it doesn't open the door for every federal judge to do something crazy, because if they do, it'll be cured by the appellate court. And if it doesn't get cured by the appellate court, it'll get cured by us. But what actually happened here was not so bad. I think the more likely thing is that they will say, okay, this injunction is dissolved. None of this injunction stands. I think the Supreme Court will say about 5-4. They'll have Roberts, and I don't think they'll have Gorsuch, but I think they will have Kavanaugh to say that. But that's not, it seems like the better outcome. But then guess what happens? The matter goes back to the judge in Amarillo, Texas, so he can continue ruling on it, right? His injunction is no good. The Fifth Circuit's injunction is no good. But then they're going to have more motions and more trials, and he can make more outrageous judgments that scare the country with nationwide effect, and that go to the Fifth Circuit and go to the Supreme Court in the future. I mean, a particular district judge has huge power in this country, and that's why the Senate has to be so careful in approving them.
Wow, this is there's a lot to unpack there, but I guess what most people watching this right now and listening to it, what they really want to know is whether or not they'll have access to abortion in blue states, and can the Supreme Court, if they decide, can they rule that life begins at conception and ban abortion across the country? And if they can, and if they lean toward that, and doesn't seem like you suspect that, but should they do that? I mean, we heard earlier that Justice Thomas was talking about, possibly getting rid of contraception, and some states wanted to ban, some birth control. We've heard that. We've even heard from states like, Alabama and Georgia that said that they would send people after pregnant women who left the state to get an abortion. I guess really, we're kind of tiptoeing in uncharted territory here, because life is not a finite moment. It is not something that people can say begins exactly right now. The Supreme Court in 73 essentially said that, the third trimester is hands off. And they at least tried to tackle this, but it's a very nuanced point, David, and we don't seem to do well with nuance anymore, not in the current political climate.
Well, I think that in the red states, if they have power, like in Alabama or Missouri or someplace like that, they will try to make life miserable for a young woman, a poor woman who wants to get an abortion, which happened under Roe v. Wade. But it'll be worse under Dobbs. As to the blue states and as to this pill, I think the worst that will happen is that you will have to go see a doctor. That they'll actually find that this is such a delicate decision. It involves so many physical and psychological issues and so forth that you have to go see a doctor, and that it can't be done by telemedicine. And then regarding the mailing and stuff like that, I think that they'll have centers set up so you can get the pill without having to mail it. I think that's one thing Governor Newsom and the other governors in the blue states will do. They'll make the access to it very, very easy. But I think the Supreme Court, the worst they'll do in the blue states is make you go see a doctor or at least a PI, and you won't be able to do it by telemedicine. That's, I think, the worst that'll happen in the blue states.
Last question. Whatever happened to the strict constructionist conservative? It seems to me like they're more the activists than the left ever was.
Well, if you look at the gun decisions, you see what a complete farce these things are, because the gun decisions that they've made, where you go back and you try to find an historical parallel, and they say things like, well, the historical parallel, you can't have a domestic violence restraining order against the perpetrator having a gun, because that wasn't historical precedent. That didn't happen during the 19th century. It didn't happen during the 19th century because they were so old-fashioned, so male supremacist, that they didn't have laws against domestic violence. So to say that those are parallels, it's just a form of words. They're not really trying to strictly interpret the Constitution or be strict constructionists. They have a certain outcome. People like Alito and Thomas, I think Gorsuch too, have made it clear that they have an outcome and they want to reach it. And it's like, okay, write some words on the page that reach the outcome that I want to reach. And that's why the judiciary, not the local judges are fine. The district court judges, let's say in California, a lot of the appellate judges are just wonderful. But this 9 on the Supreme Court, and this 5 in particular that rules the roost up there, they are not strict constructionists. They seem like they're outcome determinative, and the outcomes are this super right-wing, religiously fundamentalist agenda that they have.
You hit a nail on it. The fundamentalist package is the one that has, it's the rabbit hole. I mean, who knows, what the interpretations of the Bible and Quran the Torah, whatever. I mean, they're all subject to just wide applications.
And we have separation of church and state. They don't have this in Europe. The conservative parties in Europe stay out of these issues like abortion and school prayer. But something weird.
This Constitution has allowed for slavery. It's allowed for it's allowed states to prohibit blacks and whites from marrying. It didn't allow women to vote till after my mother was born. It is definitely open. I mean, the possibilities here, this protection that everybody looks to the Constitution for, it all depends on these judges. I think if we've learned anything, it's that we needed to really pay a lot more attention to judges. And of course, Trump was just following McConnell and the evangelicals and trying to assuage their support and their votes by appointing people like Coney Barrett, who, used to be part of a cult. Ginny Thomas, who seems to run Clarence Thomas's world and who has communications with Trump and Proud Boys and stuff. There's a lot going on now. I can see why Roberts hangs his head, because whatever Roberts hoped to say from the Supreme Court seems to me have gone out the door and maybe not to come back. David,
let me just say I have respect and admiration for Chief Justice Roberts, but he's not the swing vote anymore. There's 5 of them that are going to do what they're going to do with or without him.
Well, and I also believe that, he's such a strong believer in states' rights. And I don't mean the states' rights of the Ku Klux Klan in the 60s and all. I'm talking about the idea that the 10th Amendment is, more powerful. We all know the Commerce Clause in the past 100 years have changed dramatically what, some of the founders envisioned for this country in a way that there's no way they could understand. They couldn't understand the kind of commerce and air travel and just the small world that we now live in. But we still have a lot of challenges ahead of us, and we're going to need a court, and we're going to need some way of moving forward. I mean, I'm not convinced that Trump won't win again in 2024, David. And I'm
convinced he won't, but I've always been the what's a Pollyanna, and maybe you're the realist in this discussion.
Hey, David, thank you for being here. It's always great to talk to you. You be well, and we'll talk again soon. Okay.
Great. Take care.
So much. David Katz, a former assistant U.S. attorney, and just trying to get to the bottom of this Dominion settlement and what it really means. This Supreme Court case you just heard about, we're supposed to hear more about that on Friday, so we'll have more of that for you. Next week, we're going to talk to Rick Wilson, one of the original members of the Lincoln Project, and try to figure out exactly if the Republican Party can be fixed. And do the Democrats have a chance of putting something together that could win in 2024 and win in such a way to maybe undo some of the last 8 years of Trump and McConnell and McCarthy? That's a big if. I'm Chip Franklin again. This is What the Franklin for Really American. We'll see you next time.
We shall overcome. Yes, we can.
Person, woman, man, camera, TV.
What the f*** is wrong with you? Thanks for watching, and remember to subscribe and follow us on YouTube at Really American.